Have you ever been made to feel small? In a space you've worked your whole life to earn? What if your silence could protect your dignity, but your voice could change everything? Meet Dr. Amira Langston, a brilliant, composed young CEO who boarded Flight 815 expecting nothing but rest before a major keynote. But within minutes of sitting in first class, a quiet insult masked as a weight adjustment changed the course of her life. What if the seat they told her to move from became the seat that rewrote an entire industry? What really happened on that flight? Why did the crew freeze when she made just one call? And how did her refusal lead to a new airline protocol now known around the world? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about power, silence, and what happens when you decide to stay seated, not in defiance, but in dignity. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Now, let's begin. The hum of the jet bridge was oddly comforting, like a soft exhale after a long day. Dr. Amira Langston stepped into the first-class cabin of Horizon Air Flight 815, her rolling leather carry-on trailing behind her with quiet precision. She was dressed simply but elegantly, in a slate gray pantsuit and white sneakers. Her hair, styled in a low knot, gave her the air of someone both professional and unbothered by the need to perform. She paused for a brief moment at the threshold of row 2, the morning light spilling through the oval window of seat 2A. This was her spot. She exhaled as she sank into the plush cream leather seat, letting her shoulders relax for the first time in days. The week had been a whirlwind: 3 speaking engagements, back-to-back investor dinners, a fireside chat at the Chicago Biotech Forum, and the closing of a strategic partnership that had taken nearly 8 months to finalize. Corveda Health, the company she had built from a single grant application and a stack of NIH rejections, was finally on the cusp of entering its next phase. Now, for just a few hours, she craved silence. No questions, no panels, no smiles pressed thin by fatigue. Just air. She reached into her tote and pulled out a slim paperback, an old Octavia Butler novel she'd started months ago and never finished. She hadn't read more than 5 pages before the noise arrived. Voices, loud and piercing, filled the cabin like an ill-tuned radio. A man and woman had entered behind her. Even without turning, Amira could picture them from the tone alone. Wealth without discretion. Confidence without substance. "I told you we should have gotten here earlier." The woman huffed. The syllables stretched with impatience. "Relax, babe," the man said. "They'll figure it out. We're not flying back here. There's too many shadows for the lighting to work." Shadows, lighting. Amira resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She had heard enough influencers speak in the hotel lobby that week to know exactly what was coming. Sure enough, when she glanced across the aisle, she saw them. The couple looked like they'd just stepped out of a curated Instagram story. The man tall, heavily bronzed, with oversized sunglasses still on indoors, wore a designer sweatsuit with gold trim. The woman beside him, blonde and striking in an obvious way, wore platform heels and a neon green crop jacket that seemed to glow under the cabin lighting. Landon and Sierra Wells. She didn't know them personally, but she recognized them. The algorithm had fed their content to her before travel vlogs, couple pranks, what's in my bag videos with millions of views. Their presence in first class felt like theater, and everyone else was the unpaid audience. They were seated directly behind her. Seats 3A and 3B. Amira turned her attention back to her book. The last few passengers boarded, filling in the final few spots in economy. A steady rhythm settled over the cabin's seatbelts clicking, overhead bins closing, the muted beeps of last-minute boarding scans. Amira felt her breath steady. The flight was nearly full. It would only be 2 hours. She could get through 2 hours. Then came the smile. A crisp, almost too sweet voice rang out. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said gently, appearing at her elbow. Amira looked up and met the eyes of a woman in her early 40s. Her name tag read Christine. Christine's face was carefully composed, polite, pleasant, and yet, behind the eyes, something was already apologizing. Amira had seen that expression before. It usually came before something small was about to be taken from her. "Yes," Amira said, polite but alert. "I have a bit of an unusual request," Christine began, her voice soft but firm. "The captain has asked that we make a slight adjustment to seating due to aircraft balance. Would you mind moving to another seat? Just for safety reasons." Amira blinked. "I'm sorry," what Christine gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane. "We have a seat in row 14, economy plus. Still quite nice. It's just to help with the weight distribution." Amira stared at her. Row 14, economy plus. Her eyes flicked to the seat beside her 2B. Still empty. Her chief of staff, Maya Cheng, hadn't boarded yet but would be in that seat within minutes. "You're asking me to move to economy," Amira said, her voice even. "For balance." Christine nodded slowly, as if rehearsing empathy. "Yes, it's just a quick adjustment. And 2B is, what? Not factored into this scientific rebalancing." The attendant hesitated. "That seat is currently unoccupied, and the couple behind you is traveling together. They asked to be seated side by side in the front row, and we thought it might be easier if... So this isn't about balance." Christine's smile faltered. Amira felt the familiar sting not the first time, not even the 100th, always just beneath the surface. The subtle reshuffling, the way people assumed she could be moved, adjusted, minimized. Her mind flashed back to her fellowship years mistaken for an assistant at her own conference, told she was articulate by a board member after a keynote. Death by 1,000 cuts, all of them polite, all of them practiced. But this was different. This was her seat. And this time, she wasn't going to move. "I'm sorry," Amira said quietly, "but I'll be staying in 2A. Christine blinked. The smile remained, but the warmth behind it was gone. "Ma'am," she said, with a clipped edge now, "I'm going to have to speak with the captain if you're refusing to comply." Amira nodded once. "Please do." And just like that, the air changed. Christine's heels clicked down the aisle with urgent purpose, vanishing behind the first-class curtain as if hoping to retrieve backup. Amira remained still, her fingers loosely curled around her book, her gaze fixed on the window. Outside, a baggage cart scurried across the tarmac like a beetle, stacked with luggage that would never know the tension brewing inside this aircraft. She took a slow breath and placed her book back in her tote. The calm she'd carved out minutes earlier had been fractured. Behind her, the voices returned. She said no. Sierra's voice was hushed but unmistakable. "Seriously, she's being difficult," Landon muttered. "God, why is it always such a thing with people like that?" Amira's spine stiffened, but she didn't turn. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. She didn't need to wonder what they meant. She had heard those kinds of whispers before, always just out of reach of accountability, always deniable. The hum of the auxiliary power unit filled the silence. From the corner of her eye, she saw a few fellow passengers in first class glance in her direction. Not everyone, but enough to feel it. A collective breath held, waiting. The curtain parted. Christine returned, but she was no longer alone. Beside her stood the captain. He looked like he had stepped out of a recruitment brochure, tall, square-jawed, gray at the temples. His posture was rigid with authority. Amira turned toward him. "Ma'am," he began. His tone was not hostile, but it carried the unmistakable cadence of someone expecting obedience. "I'm Captain Douglas Kramer. I understand there's been some confusion." Amira raised an eyebrow. "There's no confusion. Your flight attendant asked me to move from the seat I paid for. I declined." Kramer shifted his weight slightly. Christine stood behind him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her waist. "Well," he said, "sometimes we do have to adjust for weight and balance, particularly on nearly full flights. The aircraft needs to be evenly distributed to fly safely." Amira stared at him, then gestured calmly toward the empty seat beside her. "Seat 2B is unoccupied. My colleague is assigned to it and will be boarding in the next few minutes. If this were truly a balance issue, wouldn't it make more sense to move passengers within the same cabin or shift cargo weight? As is standard procedure?" Captain Kramer blinked. His eyes flitted briefly toward Christine, then back to Amira. "This isn't a negotiation," he said after a pause. "We need to depart on time. We're simply asking for your cooperation." "And I'm declining," Amira said, her voice still level. A flicker of irritation passed over his face. "If you refuse to comply with crew instructions, we may have to ask you to disembark the aircraft." So that was the threat. Not a warning. Not a conversation. An ultimatum. Amira nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. She could feel her heartbeat pulsing steadily in her chest. Her hands remained still in her lap. She wasn't afraid, but she was tired. Tired of being tested in places where she'd earned her right to just exist. Tired of wondering if silence was dignity or complicity. Tired of always calculating her tone, her posture, her words, so that someone else wouldn't feel challenged. She looked up at the captain. "I'm not refusing a lawful order," she said quietly. "I'm refusing to be lied to. This isn't about aircraft balance. It's about convenience. You want to move me because the couple behind me wants to sit up front. But I didn't pay for convenience. I paid for respect." Kramer's jaw tensed. "I'm giving you a final chance to comply," he said, "or we'll proceed with deplaning you and continue without further delay." Christine took a step closer, her voice now sharpened with rehearsed professionalism. "Ma'am, we're trying to avoid escalation here." Amira gave her a long, level look. "No, you're trying to avoid accountability." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Kramer straightened. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if bracing for her to start filming. She didn't. She didn't need a viral video. She had something far more effective. Her thumb hovered over her favorites list. Second contact from the top Thomas Yee, charter manager, Altura Jet Partnerships, the man who managed every charter under Corvida's corporate travel program. She tapped the name. The phone began to ring. Christine glanced toward Kramer with uncertainty. "Who are you calling?" the captain asked. Amira looked up at him, her voice soft but resolute. "You'll find out soon." The call connected on the second ring. "Dr. Langston," came the voice on the other end. Crisp, professional, and immediately attentive. "Hi, Thomas," Amira said calmly. "I'm on Horizon 815. "There's an issue." Thomas's voice instantly shifted to concern. "Is everything all right, mechanical?" "No. The crew's attempting to remove me from my assigned seat in first class. Claims it's a weight and balance issue. In truth, it's to accommodate a pair of passengers who want to sit together. I've already informed them I won't be moving." A pause on the line. Then understood. "That's a direct violation of your contract terms." Amira spoke clearly, aware of every ear now listening in. This is a Corvita chartered flight. Correct, yes. Ma'am. Full charter. Paid and manifested under your corporate block. Then please proceed with grounding this aircraft immediately, she said. Captain Kramer's face drained of color. What he said sharply. Wait, what do you mean? Chartered Amira turned to him fully now. This isn't a commercial flight, she said. You don't have a single paying customer on this aircraft other than the ones from my company. Christine took a shaky step back. Thomas's voice echoed through the speaker. Stand by. Dr. Langston, I'm notifying ground operations now. You'll receive a call through the flight crew's headset in under a minute. Captain Kramer looked stunned. This is a misunderstanding. No. Captain, Amira said, her tone like ice sliding across glass. It's a decision. Yours. And now there are consequences. Just then, the intercom beside Kramer buzzed. He stepped aside to take the call, his hand trembling slightly. Amira sat back in her seat. She could feel the entire plane shift not physically, but atmospherically, like a reset had occurred. No more whispers, no more condescension, just silence and respect. For a few seconds after the intercom clicked off, there was no sound in the cabin, not the hum of the air vents, not the shuffle of luggage or creak of leather. It was the kind of stillness that happens when people realize they've been watching a private moment and can no longer pretend they weren't. Captain Kramer stood stiffly near the bulkhead, his jaw clenched. Headset tilted slightly on his head as if resisting the reality of what he had just heard. His authority had been checked mid-flight, not by turbulence, but by truth. Christine stood nearby, her hands pressed against her thighs, her lips parted in quiet disbelief. She was staring at Amira, but not really seeing her. Her gaze had gone unfocused. The friendly smile, the syrupy tone, the composed mask of customer service had all dissolved into confusion. Amira didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her phone sat face down on the tray table. The call concluded. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, shoulders relaxed, spine upright. She stared straight ahead. Her silence was louder than anything else in the cabin. A voice finally broke the stillness. It wasn't Kramer's. It wasn't Christine's. It was Sierra Wells. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, half laughing, half snapping. All this drama just because she didn't want to switch seats? Amira's eyes didn't move, but her jaw tightened just slightly. Sierra leaned forward from row 3, her voice pitched deliberately to Carrie. She could have just moved. Like, honestly, it's not like she owns the plane. Landon muttered something in agreement, something low and smug, something that started with people like her. Christine winced. Amira turned her head, slowly, to look at Sierra. Her expression was unreadable. "I don't," she said evenly. "But today, I do own this flight." Sierra blinked. "I beg your pardon." Amira's voice remained calm. "This aircraft was chartered in full by Corvita Health. I'm the founder and CEO. Every seat, every meal, every hour of this flight was purchased under a corporate agreement. So no, I don't own the plane, but I do own this flight, and you are sitting in a seat that was never meant to be yours." Sierra sat back, her face paling under her flawless foundation. Landon shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at the curtain as if calculating an exit. Christine cleared her throat, a desperate attempt to reassert control. "Dr. Langston, I didn't have that information when I made the request." "No," Amira said. "You didn't bother to check." Christine opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Kramer for help, but he was still holding the intercom headset, murmuring responses to someone on the other end. His eyes were darting back and forth, no longer filled with confident authority. He looked like a man trying to land on a runway that no longer existed. A few rows back, another voice called out, "Excuse me, did I hear correctly that this is a chartered flight?" It was a man in business, casual, laptop still open on his tray. He looked vaguely familiar to Amira, one of the new hires from operations, mid-level, maybe 30, nervous energy and well-meaning eyes. Christine hesitated. "Yes. This is a corporate charter." He looked from her to Amira, then back, then closed his laptop with a soft click and leaned toward the aisle. "Well then," he said slowly, "why were those two even allowed on board?" He gestured toward the Wells couple. Landon sat straighter, offended. "We're passengers just like anyone else." Amira didn't speak, but another passenger did. "I work in travel compliance," said a woman in 4C, lifting her voice just enough to carry. "Charter manifests are tightly controlled. Everyone has to be on the approved list. You can't just show up. You have to be cleared in advance." "So? How did they board?" Now Christine looked pale. She fumbled with her tablet, fingers tapping rapidly as she checked the digital manifest. Amira already knew what was coming. She could see the panic blooming in Christine's eyes, the mental backtracking. The moment she had accepted a favor request from an attractive, wealthy-seeming couple without even checking their tickets. The moment she had seen Amira as an easier person to displace. Quieter, less trouble. Christine's voice cracked. I need to speak to the gate agent." "No need," said another voice from behind the curtain. It was crisp, clipped, and utterly done with the day. A woman stepped through the aisle, a short, compact figure in a navy blazer with a staff badge clipped to her lapel. She looked directly at Christine. "I just checked the Wells booking. Their reservation was for yesterday's flight. They were late and missed boarding. They were not rebooked for today. Their tickets are invalid." Gas echoed in the cabin. Sierra's face flushed a blotchy red. Landon looked around as if waiting for a camera crew to emerge and say it was all a joke. Amira let out a quiet breath, one she hadn't realized she was holding. There it was, the lie laid bare. Christine opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her entire posture collapsed inward, like scaffolding buckling from a failed load. From the back of the plane, someone coughed, then muttered, "Unbelievable." The gate agent looked at Captain Kramer, whose face had gone from ruddy to ashen. "I've notified the ground crew," she said. "The jet bridge is returning. The flight is officially grounded." Murmurs spread like wildfire through the cabin. Amira remained seated, composed, a quiet eye at the center of the gathering storm. Another flight attendant peeked through the curtain, visibly confused. Christine waved her off with a barely there shake of the head. She looked like she was about to cry. The man in row 4 opened his laptop again and began typing rapidly. Tweets. Amira could almost feel them being drafted midair. And she knew. This story wasn't staying on the plane. Captain Douglas Kramer stood at the front of the cabin, headset slack in his hand, the mic dangling uselessly near his chin. He looked out at his first-class passengers, most of whom were now staring straight at him, their faces unreadable. It was the silence that undid him, the weight of it, that heavy, unblinking pause that let a man know his authority was no longer absolute. Christine Hale was motionless beside him. Her hands trembled as she clutched her tablet against her chest. She had stopped pretending. No more customer service smile. No cheery cadence. Only dread. Amira watched them both. She didn't rise. She didn't need to. From her seat in 2A, she held the center of the room, The voice of the gate agent still lingered in the air. Invalid tickets. Charter manifest violation. Grounded flight. The words had landed with the force of a thunderclap. It was over, but only on the surface. Captain Kramer finally spoke, his voice low, his professional calm fraying at the edges. "Dr. Langston," he said, no longer attempting formality, "if I may, we'd like to resolve this situation as quickly and quietly as possible. The couple in question will be removed from the flight. You're welcome to keep your seat. There's no need to escalate further." Amira raised her eyes to meet his. The audacity of the word hung in the air like a stench. Escalate. As if she had done that. As if calmly refusing to be moved had ignited this chain of events. As if her voice measured, rational, was the problem. She blinked once, slowly. "No," she said. Kramer blinked. "No. We won't be flying with Horizon Air today. Not under these circumstances." A murmur ran through the cabin. Shock, then understanding. Christine took a step forward, her voice cracking. "Please, I understand this looks bad, but this isn't about optics," Amira interrupted. Her tone was steady, but her words cut like glass. "It's about values. Your team lied. You fabricated a safety concern to cover for preferential treatment. That's not bad PR. That's a breach of ethics." Kramer swallowed, visibly trying to reassert control. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "You didn't ask," Amira replied. Silence followed. Then came a new voice. Calm, measured, firm. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Maya Chung, now standing in the aisle a few rows behind. "May I have your attention, please?" Maya had boarded moments ago, unnoticed during the chaos. She stood tall in her burgundy blazer, sleek ponytail down her back, her voice steady as stone. "My name is Maya Cheng. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Core Vita Health. This flight was contracted as a private charter for our executive and leadership teams. Due to a breach of contract and ethical misconduct by the operating airline, our CEO has made the decision to terminate our travel arrangement with Horizon Air." Maya paused just long enough to let it settle. "We are working with our charter partner, Altura Jet, to arrange alternate transportation. Our logistics team will assist with accommodations, rebooking, and next steps. Please remain seated while we initiate an orderly deplaning process. You will not be penalized. All expenses will be covered by the company." Soft gas, nods. Whispers of wow. "And did you hear that slipped through the cabin?" Amira watched as the reality sank in. This wasn't just a power move. It was a line in the sand, and her employees had just seen it drawn with unwavering clarity. Christine turned toward her again, eyes pleading now. "Please," she whispered, just loud enough for Amira to hear. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing. They looked important. They said they were on the list. I just—" Her voice trailed off. Amira looked at her, and she saw the fear, but also the deflection, the classic denial wrapped in apology. "Not sorry for the harm. Sorry for the consequence." Amira spoke quietly, but firmly. "You didn't ask who I was. You assumed who I wasn't." Christine flinched like she'd been slapped. The truth stung more than a raised voice ever could. Behind her, Sierra and Landon Wells sat frozen. The glow of entitlement drained from their faces. Sierra was scrolling through her phone in a frenzy. Landon had pulled his hood up. They looked like children caught red-handed in a prank that had turned into a federal case. The gate agent approached them with 2 airport security officers. She spoke gently, but there was no room for argument. "Mr. and Mrs. Wells, you'll need to deplane. You are not authorized passengers on this flight." Sierra tried to argue. Voice shrill. "I have followers waiting for my content. This is going to ruin our trip. Can't you just fix the list? But the security officers weren't influencers. They were procedure, and procedure didn't respond to followers. Within minutes, the couple had been escorted down the aisle, their designer luggage trundling pitifully behind them. The cabin door reopened. The jet bridge reconnected with a slow metallic moan. Light from the terminal spilled back into the cabin. The flight was done. The captain didn't say another word. Christine stepped away. Her shoulders curled inward. She knew. It was over. The first-class cabin remained still. Then, quietly, someone clapped, just once. Then again, a slow, soft rhythm from the back of the cabin as one of the junior team members, a young analyst named Danielle, stood up and clapped in quiet solidarity. Others joined, not a celebration, an affirmation. Amira stood slowly, finally rising from her seat. She gathered her coat, tucked her phone into her purse, and stepped into the aisle. Maya fell into step beside her. As they walked toward the door, a few employees offered small nods of respect. Soft words like, "Thank you, and we've got your back." Amira didn't respond aloud. She just met their eyes, and they knew. The real flight hadn't taken off, but something else had. Something bigger. The hallway leading from the jet bridge was strangely quiet, as if the air itself was unsure how to move forward after what had just unfolded. Doctor? Amira Langston walked with slow, measured steps. Maya Chung remained close beside her, tablet in hand, already coordinating with the logistics team. Behind them, a handful of Core Vita employees exited the aircraft in small groups, most with their carry-ons in tow and quiet conversations trailing after them. There was no frustration, no chaos, just a steady current of resolve moving through the terminal. Amira's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She stopped near gate C202 and pulled it out. The screen lit up with a call from Thomas Yee. She answered with a soft, "Hello? Dr. Langston," Thomas said, his voice even but concerned. "I just received confirmation that the aircraft has been officially grounded. The control tower relayed the directive, and Horizons Legal has already reached out to request a formal incident report." "Good," Amira replied. She stepped slightly away from the foot traffic. Her voice lowered, but steady. "Thank you for acting so quickly. I'll be filing a formal breach notice under our charter agreement." "I assumed you would," Thomas said. Then after a pause, "Are you all right?" Amira considered the question. Physically, she was fine. Her heart rate had returned to normal. Her posture had relaxed, but something deeper had shifted, something she wasn't ready to name yet. She looked through the terminal window at the grounded plane parked just beyond the glass. "I will be," she said. "I've already requested a replacement aircraft through Altura's VIP fleet." Thomas continued, "Our best Gulfstream G700 is available out of the private terminal here at O'Hare. We can have it fueled, catered, and ready within 90 minutes. That's perfect. And hotel rooms have them booked at the Four Seasons for tonight. Executive suites only." "You got it." And the crew Amira hesitated. "Let's not reuse Horizon for the remainder of this quarter." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just a boundary being drawn firm, permanent. "You'll get a new provider by morning," Thomas said without missing a beat. They ended the call. Amira turned to Maya, who had just received a message on her tablet. "They're confirming the hangar," Maya said. "And Altura is bringing in ground transportation for the entire team. Black cars, direct from this terminal to the private gate. Everyone should be wheels up by noon." "Perfect." Maya studied her for a moment. Do you want to speak to the team? Not yet, Amira said. Let's get them moving first. Then we'll talk. She slipped her phone back into her coat pocket and walked slowly toward a bench facing the tarmac. The glass in front of her reflected her own face faintly. She saw herself a 32-year-old black woman with dark eyes that revealed little, a composed exterior built from years of learning when to speak and when to wait. She sat, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it all, not the inconvenience, not the optics, the betrayal, the way the system still defaulted to displacing her, even when she was the one who'd paid for the entire aircraft. She thought of the moments in the past when she'd complied without question, when she had smiled through it, the meetings where she'd been called young lady by venture capitalists her own age, the time she'd been asked if she was with the speaker before her keynote, the subtle slights she had worn like armor. Today, she had done something different. She had refused to shrink. Maya sat beside her quietly, waiting. Amira turned her head slightly. You ever feel like no matter how high you climb, someone still sees you as temporary? Maya nodded slowly. Yes, all the time. There was no need to say more. They sat in silence for a few seconds longer, watching a baggage cart slowly circle the aircraft like a confused animal. Then Maya said, Christine's probably going to lose her job. She made her choice. Maya didn't argue. After another beat, she added, There's going to be press. I know. And backlash. I know that too. Maya looked at her. But also, impact. Amira exhaled. We'll see. They sat in silence again, not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence says more than words. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Danielle, the young analyst who had started the slow clap on the plane. Thank you for standing up for all of us. I've never seen that before in real life. Amira stared at the screen. She hadn't stood up to inspire anyone. She hadn't planned to make a statement. She just hadn't wanted to be moved like furniture, to be treated as optional. She typed a reply, but deleted it. Instead, she pocketed her phone and stood. Maya, she said, her tone shifting into something sharp and decisive. I want you to draft a letter for our legal team. We'll terminate the contract with Horizon Air for cause. Make sure it includes full reimbursement for the grounded flight, loss of productivity, reputational harm, and emergency transport costs. Loop in PR. We'll need a statement before the end of the day. Got it. And let's prepare a formal review of all charter vendors. I want a new ethics clause embedded in every agreement. Something enforceable. Maya tapped notes into her tablet. Done. And then, Amira added, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone on my team. Not to the next black woman flying in seat 2A. Maya smiled faintly. Already ahead of you. I reached out to our HR chief this morning. She said we should talk about creating something bigger. Something public-facing. Amira nodded. Let's talk on the plane. They walked back toward the waiting area where their team had gathered. The cars had arrived. The alternate flight would be ready soon. As they moved, passengers cleared a path, some nodding respectfully, others avoiding eye contact. And Amira understood. She hadn't just grounded a plane. She'd grounded a way of thinking. And from the looks of it, the turbulence was just beginning. The hallway leading from the jet bridge was strangely quiet, as if the air itself was unsure how to move forward after what had just unfolded. Dr. Amira Langston walked with slow, measured steps. Maya Cheng remained close beside her, tablet in hand, already coordinating with the logistics team. Behind them, a handful of Core Vita employees exited the aircraft in small groups, most with their carry-ons in tow and quiet conversations trailing after them. There was no frustration, no chaos, just a steady current of resolve moving through the terminal. Amira's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She stopped near gate C22 and pulled it out. The screen lit up with a call from Thomas Yee. She answered with a soft, "Hello." "Dr. Langston," Thomas said, his voice even but concerned. "I just received confirmation that the aircraft has been officially grounded. The control tower relayed the directive, and Horizons Legal has already reached out to request a formal incident report." "Good," Amira replied. She stepped slightly away from the foot traffic. Her voice lowered but steady. "Thank you for acting so quickly. I'll be filing a formal breach notice under our charter agreement." "I assumed you would," Thomas said. Then after a pause, "Are you all right?" Amira considered the question. Physically, she was fine. Her heart rate had returned to normal. Her posture had relaxed, but something deeper had shifted, something she wasn't ready to name yet. She looked through the terminal window at the grounded plane parked just beyond the glass. "I will be," she said. "I've already requested a replacement aircraft through Altura's VIP fleet," Thomas continued. "Our best Gulfstream G700 is available out of the private terminal here at O'Hare. We can have it fueled, catered, and ready within 90 minutes. That's perfect. And hotel rooms. Have them booked at the Four Seasons for tonight. Executive suites only. You got it." And the crew. Amira hesitated. "Let's not reuse Horizon for the remainder of this quarter." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just a boundary being drawn firm, permanent. "You'll get a new provider by morning," Thomas said without missing a beat. They ended the call. Amira turned to Maya, who had just received a message on her tablet. "They're confirming the hangar," Maya said, "and Altura's bringing in ground transportation for the entire team. Black cars, direct from this terminal to the private gate. Everyone should be wheels up by noon." "Perfect." Maya studied her for a moment. "Do you want to speak to the team?" "Not yet," Amira said. "Let's get them moving first. Then we'll talk." She slipped her phone back into her coat pocket and walked slowly toward a bench facing the tarmac. The glass in front of her reflected her own face faintly. She saw herself a 32-year-old black woman with dark eyes that revealed little, a composed exterior built from years of learning when to speak and when to wait. She sat, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it all. Not the inconvenience, not the optics, the betrayal, the way the system still defaulted to displacing her, even when she was the one who'd paid for the entire aircraft. She thought of the moments in the past when she'd complied without question, when she had smiled through it, the meetings where she'd been called young lady by venture capitalists her own age, the time she'd been asked if she was with the speaker before her keynote, the subtle slights she had worn like armor. Today, she had done something different. She had refused to shrink. Maya sat beside her quietly, waiting. Amira turned her head slightly. "You ever feel like no matter how high you climb, someone still sees you as temporary?" Maya nodded slowly. "Yes, all the time." There was no need to say more. They sat in silence for a few seconds longer, watching a baggage cart slowly circle the aircraft like a confused animal. Then Maya said, "Christine's probably going to lose her job." She made her choice. Maya didn't argue. After another beat, she added, "There's going to be press." "I know, and backlash. I know that too." Maya looked at her. "But also, impact. Amira exhaled. We'll see. They sat in silence again, not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence says more than words. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Danielle, the young analyst who had started the slow clap on the plane. Thank you for standing up. For all of us. I've never seen that before in real life. Amira stared at the screen. She hadn't stood up to inspire anyone. She hadn't planned to make a statement. She just hadn't wanted to be moved like furniture, to be treated as optional. She typed a reply, but deleted it. Instead, she pocketed her phone and stood. Maya, she said, her tone shifting into something sharp and decisive. I want you to draft a letter for our legal team. We'll terminate the contract with Horizon Air for cause. Make sure it includes full reimbursement for the grounded flight, loss of productivity, reputational harm, and emergency transport costs. Loop and PR. We'll need a statement before the end of the day. Got it. And let's prepare a formal review of all charter vendors. I want a new ethics clause embedded in every agreement. Something enforceable. Maya tapped notes into her tablet. Done. And then, Amira added, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone on my team, not to the next black woman flying in seat 2A. Maya smiled faintly. Already ahead of you. I reached out to our HR chief this morning. She said we should talk about creating something bigger, something public-facing. Amira nodded. Let's talk on the plane. They walked back toward the waiting area where their team had gathered. The cars had arrived. The alternate flight would be ready soon. As they moved, passengers cleared a path, some nodding respectfully, others avoiding eye contact. And Amira understood. She hadn't just grounded a plane. She'd grounded a way of thinking. And from the looks of it, the turbulence was just beginning. At precisely 7:58 a.m. Pacific Time, Amira Langston's jet touched down at San Francisco International. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a softness that made the landing feel more like a conclusion than an arrival. No applause, no ceremony, just precision. She hadn't said a word for the final hour of the flight. Her mind wasn't silent, though. It was reordering, sorting through what had happened, not to react, but to prepare. Her team filed off quietly. Danielle gave her a respectful nod, then disappeared into the waiting car that would take her to the downtown Corvita building. The others followed suit, each carrying the unspoken understanding that something significant had just begun, something bigger than a canceled flight. Maya waited at the bottom of the steps, holding her phone. There's going to be a board call, she said. Not ours. Theirs. Amira raised an eyebrow. Horizon emergency meeting? Noon Eastern? Amira sighed, brushing a hand over the lapel of her blazer. It was the same jacket she'd worn when she pitched Corvita's first funding round. Back when investors couldn't decide if she was too ambitious or not assertive enough, she knew what those words meant. Then, now, always. What are they hoping to accomplish? She asked. Containment, Maya said. But it's too late. The clip of the gate agent confirming the fake booking is everywhere. Someone recorded it. It's got 2 million views already. Amira nodded once, slowly. Let them scramble. She stepped into her waiting car and closed the door without another word. While she rode into the city, in Atlanta, the mood inside Horizon Air's executive suite had shifted from concern to panic. Richard Granger stood again in the middle of a hastily reconvened leadership meeting. This time, he wasn't holding printed notes. He was holding a letter. She's terminating all contracts with us for the next 2 quarters, he announced, effective immediately. How many flights is that? Asked someone from the legal team. 76. He said, all charter. Most of them premium routes New York, San Diego, Vancouver. They just wiped out nearly $12 million in forecasted revenue. Silence. And what about the complaint? Another voice asked. Richard hesitated. She's filing under FAA Charter Ethics Clause 12B, discrimination based on race under the guise of safety enforcement. That clause hasn't been activated in years, the legal officer muttered. Until now, Richard replied. The CEO of Horizon Air, a salt and pepper man named Grant Meller, leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He'd been unusually quiet the whole time. She never raised her voice, he said softly. She never posted. She never even named us. And still, we're here. Someone else chimed in. Should we offer a settlement? Grant shook his head. She doesn't want money. She wants structure. And I don't think she's going to stop with us. In another corner of the building, Christine Hale sat alone in an empty break room. Her badge sat on the table in front of her. Her phone was off. Her eyes were red. She had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. No one told her not to talk to the press, but they didn't need to. She had watched the video of herself. Not the whole thing. Just the part where her voice said the words, "We need to redistribute weight in the cabin for safety." It didn't even sound like her anymore. It sounded like someone trained to use policy as a shield. Someone who believed she was keeping the peace, when in reality, she had thrown a quiet match into dry grass. She remembered the moment vividly. Amira looking at her, calm but firm, refusing to move. It had shocked her not because it was hostile, but because it was unbothered. That calm had exposed everything, her assumptions, her shortcuts, her bias. She had not just made a mistake. She had revealed a pattern, and now that pattern had come back around. In San Francisco, Amira stepped into her downtown office. The building was quiet, just the early team, fresh coffee brewing. She passed through the glass doors with a quiet nod to the receptionist. Inside her office, sunlight filtered through the windows and settled gently on the shelf of framed photos. Her mother, young and radiant in a lab coat, her grandmother in church whites, a candid shot of Amira herself, laughing on stage at a tech conference. They had all paid a cost to be where they were. She sank into her chair, opened her laptop, and clicked into the media dashboard. Every major outlet had picked up the story. Most hadn't used her name per her team's request, but the headline said enough. First-class power shift black woman. Grounds flight over discrimination. She didn't post. She didn't film. She just said no. Corporate charter unravels over bias assumption. Maya walked in a moment later. You've got interviews lined up. MSNBC, The Verge. Bloomberg wants an exclusive. Amira closed the tab. I don't want a spotlight. I want standards. Maya smiled. Then it's time we give them one. Amira turned. What are you thinking? An initiative, Maya said. A formal internal pledge. Not just for Core Vita, but for all our partners. Vendors, airlines, security contractors. A dignity and transport charter. Real language, clear protocol, board support. Amira leaned back. And what would we call it? Maya hesitated, then grinned. The Langston Line. Amira's eyebrows rose. No, she said softly, almost chuckling. Yes, Maya replied. You drew the line. You didn't move. That's what this is about. Amira fell quiet again. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. But inside, something new had already taken flight. She looked at Maya. All right, she said. Let's write it. The press release went live at 9:03 a.m. Pacific time. Maya had crafted every word with the precision of a scalpel, not just cutting through noise, but opening something, a new path. It was bold, but clear, emotional, but rooted in policy. The title read simply, "The Langston Line," a corporate commitment to passenger dignity in air travel. The subhead followed Corvida Health Launch's first-of-its-kind initiative to combat discriminatory treatment in transportation. CEO Amira Langston urges fellow leaders to codify respect into their operational standards. Within an hour, it had been shared by over 50 CEOs. By noon, it was on NPR. By evening, it was on Capitol Hill. But within certain rooms with heavy doors and polished floors, the reaction was less enthusiastic. At the American Council for Aviation Partnerships, a private Zoom meeting had just begun. 10 airline executives, 5 legal advisors, and one very nervous PR director sat in virtual silence as the president of the council. Marjorie Kelton cleared her throat. "This Langston Line is clever," she said. Her voice clipped, very polished, very shareable. "But we need to decide right now how seriously we take this." One executive, a younger man with a sharp suit and a tired smile, offered a tentative opinion. "It's not just a hashtag. It's already being built into vendor contracts. If Corvida can do it, others might follow." Marjorie narrowed her eyes. "That's exactly what worries me. Back in San Francisco." Amira sat at the long oval table in Corvida's 28th floor conference room, surrounded by senior leadership. The view behind her framed the skyline in clean lines and soft sun. A copy of the initiative sat printed in front of each person in the room. Maya began walking them through the key sections. Clause 1. Every transportation vendor must demonstrate verified anti-discrimination training across customer-facing roles. Clause 2. Safety protocol may not be used to circumvent established seating rights without documented cause reviewed within 48 hours. Clause 3. Partner vendors found in violation may face immediate suspension and public accountability reports, posted quarterly. Amira watched the room carefully. Some nodded, some scribbled notes, but a few had that look hesitant, uncertain, trying to reconcile innovation with risk. David Renner, the CFO, finally spoke. "I believe in the intent, but are we prepared for the pushback? This is going to make waves." "We're not here to be safe," Amira replied quietly. "We're here to be honest." David leaned back, folding his arms. "You do realize vendors might walk away, that we could lose price leverage, volume deals. Is that a line we're ready to hold?" Amira held his gaze. "If that's the price of integrity," she said, "then yes." She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence did the work. After the meeting, Maya followed her into the hallway. "That was the first crack," she said. "There'll be more." "I know." "You sure you want to do this?" Amira stopped walking. "Maya, if I'd gotten off that plane quietly, if I'd just sat back down and let them shuffle me into another row, would we even be standing here having this conversation?" Maya didn't answer. "Exactly," Amira said. "So I won't pretend this is just a contract clause. This is a decision. And the people who benefit from pretending it's small, they're going to call it an overreaction. Or worse. They already are," Maya admitted, showing her a screen. One headline read, "New Langston Line Policy Could Upend Private Aviation. Another CEO overcorrects after onboard dispute." Amira handed the phone back. "Let them write. We'll build." Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Christine Hale sat at her kitchen table, staring at the news. She had taken off her Horizon name badge weeks ago, but she couldn't seem to throw it away. It sat on the counter next to a cold mug of coffee. She hadn't left the house much. Every time she did, she imagined being recognized. She didn't know what people would say or what she'd say back. At night, she replayed the moment in her head. Her voice, the way it sounded controlled, clinical. The worst part was knowing she hadn't meant harm, but she had caused it anyway. That was the thing about bias. It didn't need to roar. It could whisper, and her whisper had knocked the entire industry off its axis. She picked up her phone and stared at Amira's face in an online article. Calm, powerful, elegant. Christine remembered that face clearly, how it had stayed composed even as the gate agent exposed the lie, how it hadn't begged or yelled or protested. It had just stopped cooperating, and everything had unraveled from there. She opened a new email draft. To Dr. Amira Langston. Subject, no excuses. She typed, paused, deleted the body, tried again. I know an apology can't undo what I did, but I need you to know. I see it now. I saw it on your face that day, and I've been seeing it ever since. I thought I was being neutral. I wasn't, and I'm sorry. She hovered over send, then clicked. No reply came, but for the first time in weeks, she breathed. The next morning, Amira stepped into her office and found a printed copy of the apology on her desk, slipped there quietly by Maya. She read it once, then set it aside. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. But she wasn't angry. She was moving forward. And the line she had drawn was no longer hers alone. It was being carried by others, now copied, emailed, quoted. The Langston Line was no longer just a moment. It was becoming a movement. The invitation arrived in a sealed white envelope, hand-delivered by a courier who refused to leave it at the front desk. Inside, the card was embossed, simple and cool to the touch. The United States Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation private briefing request. Dr. Amira Langston location, Russell Senate Office Building, room 253. Time 3. 0 p.m. Wednesday. It wasn't a subpoena. It wasn't a request for testimony. It was something more ambiguous, and in some ways, more dangerous. It was an invitation to the table. Amira held the card between her fingers in her office, sunlight grazing the edge. Across the room, Maya studied her face. They want to talk about the Langston Line, Maya said. No, Amira replied softly. They want to talk about control. You going? Yes. Maya hesitated. You know they'll try to reframe this, dilute it, call it a concern about overreach or business disruption. I know. Then why accept? Amira looked up. Because sometimes they don't expect us to show up. They expect us to cause a stir, but not to sit down calmly at their tables, not to speak fluently in their language, not to hold our ground without trembling. She set the invitation aside. I'm going to Washington. 2 days later. Amira stood outside the Russell Building, the gray pillars rising like ancient stone above her. She wore a black tailored coat, no jewelry except for the slim wedding band she never removed. Maya waited behind, staying at the hotel in case coordination was needed. This was a solo conversation, one woman against the architecture of an entire industry. Inside room 253, the setting was deceptively casual. A long table, polished wood, no cameras, just 12 people seated around it. Senators, advisors, and transportation aides. There were nameplates, water pitchers, and quiet tension hanging in the space. Senator Marvin Claiborne, the ranking member, stood as Amira entered. Dr. Langston, thank you for coming. She nodded once, then took the empty seat at the head of the table. Senator Abigail Renner from North Dakota leaned forward, her smile tight. "You've certainly started a conversation." "Dr. Langston?" "I didn't start it," Amira replied. "I just refused to leave it unanswered." The room shifted slightly at her tone. A few aides glanced at each other. Claiborne cleared his throat. "We invited you here because several airline associations have voiced concern about the unintended consequences of the Langston Line. They worry it could lead to legal exposure, contractual strain, and public confusion." Amira folded her hands on the table. "Let me be clear. The only thing that causes public confusion is when paying passengers are treated as threats simply for existing in spaces they've earned." A murmur ran down the table. Senator Renner tried again. "Surely you understand that discretion is sometimes necessary, that airline crews need flexibility in real-time decision-making. Policies like yours might paralyze them." Amira looked at her calmly. "What paralyzes them is unexamined bias. What policies like mine do is force accountability. If a safety decision is real, it will hold up under review. If it's a smokescreen, it won't. That's not paralysis. That's transparency." A silence followed. Then Claiborne leaned in. "Let me ask it plainly. Are you trying to set new federal standards?" Amira didn't blink. "No," she said. "I'm setting new expectations. And if the government won't do it, private contracts will. That hit?" Several aides began scribbling. Claiborne tilted his head slightly. "Then tell us what you want." Amira looked around the table, her voice level. "I want your support. Not with laws you won't pass. Not with statements you'll dilute. But with silence. Stay out of the way. Don't let lobbyists gut this before it can breathe. If you can't help, don't interfere." Renner opened her mouth, but Claiborne lifted a hand. "We've heard enough." Amira stood slowly, her coat still buttoned. "Thank you for your time." She walked out without another word. Back at the hotel, Maya met her in the lobby, eyes scanning her face. "How did it go?" "They don't like being told what they can't control," Amira said. "And I told them anyway." Maya handed her a tablet. "You might want to see this." The homepage of the New York Times glowed across the screen. Langston holds her line. Senate meets corporate power shift with unease. The photo was of Amira exiting the Senate building, calm, composed, alone. She stared at it for a moment, then looked up. "They thought I came to ask permission." Maya smiled. They forgot who booked the plane. The email arrived just after midnight. Amira had already set her phone aside, trying for once to give her mind the silence it needed. But when Maya forwarded the message with only 3 words, "You'll want this," she sat up in bed and opened her laptop. The subject line read, "From one who stayed quiet too long, sent by G. Meller Horizon Exec. Org." Amira stared at the name for a long moment. Grant Meller, the CEO of Horizon Air. She remembered his silence more than his words during her years working with their charter division. He was the type who didn't get involved until the quarterly numbers slipped or the press turned sour. But now, he had written her directly. She clicked. "Dr. Langston, I've read everything you've put forward. I've watched how you've moved not just through the media, but through the silence, through the corporate layers that most people never bother peeling back. You didn't just cancel a flight. You changed the direction of the conversation, and you did it without spectacle. That's rare. I won't insult you with apologies for what my team failed to do that day, but I will offer something else. Horizon Air needs a reset, quietly, comprehensively, and quickly. Our board is split, but there are enough of us who are beginning to understand that this isn't about one incident. It's about decades of drift. We're preparing to overhaul our charter client equity policy. We want you to consult directly. It would be under NDA at first, but not forever. If you're willing, let me know. Grant Meller Amira read the message twice, then a third time. She didn't reply that night. She needed to think, and more than that, she needed to feel her way through it. By morning, she was still undecided. Maya met her in the conference room. So she asked, "I don't trust his motives," Amira said. "Should you?" "No. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't listen." Maya tilted her head. "He wants you to fix what he refused to address for years. Clean his legacy with your credibility." Amira nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like." And Amira sighed. "And if I say no, the next woman they do this to won't have a chance, because the system will still be the same, only sneakier." Maya folded her arms. "You'd be legitimizing them." "No," Amira said. "I'd be leveraging them." She opened her laptop and began typing. "Mr. Meller, I don't operate in shadows. If we do this, it will be structured, time-bound, and public within 90 days. I won't be a prop. I won't be a quiet consultant. You want change. Let's begin with the parts that matter hiring: protocol, review boards, and captain authority language. Send the draft policy. I'll mark it. Then we'll talk. Dr. Amira Langston." By that evening, the reply came, "Agreed. Draft en route." Within 72 hours, Amira received a 47-page document outlining Horizon's proposed changes. She read it in full, marking it line by line like an editor combing through an overdue thesis. Clause 8. Crew may request seat relocation for weight balance purposes with pilot consultation. She drew a thick red line through it and wrote, "Specify review process. Add language on historical misuse and training requirement." Clause 17. All charter clients must comply with code of conduct, she added, and so must staff. Include accountability clause. Bias incidents must trigger third-party review. Maya peeked over her shoulder. "You're doing surgical work here. It's what they should have done from the start. Why not burn it all down instead?" Amira didn't look up, because not everyone on that flight crew was guilty. Not every airline worker is complicit. Systems are built on defaults. If we don't rewrite the defaults, they just recreate themselves in the next form. When she finally sent the annotated draft back, she attached one final note. "Progress is not what you announce. It's what you prove. Let's see what Horizon is willing to prove." Across the country, the whispers about the Langston Line were no longer whispers. Major medical suppliers began requesting it be added to their travel procurement contracts. A well-known biotech firm updated its travel vendor policy to mirror Corvita's exact language. It wasn't a wave yet, but it was a tide. Amira watched from a careful distance, not rushing to claim credit. She stayed measured, grounded, intentional. The moment she'd spoken from her seat in 2A had never been about exposure. It was about refusal, refusing to be made small in a space she had earned. That refusal had turned into a roadmap. One morning, her executive assistant entered the office holding a copy of The Atlantic. "Page 12, she said, smiling. The headline read, "How One Quiet No Built the Loudest Reform in Air Travel." The subhead, "Dr. Amira Langston and the Subtle Revolution at 35,000 feet. Amira skimmed the piece, nodding quietly. It wasn't perfect, but it captured something close to the truth. By late afternoon, Grant Meller scheduled their first video call. When the screen lit up, he looked older, not frail, just more aware. "I read your annotations," he began, "and you didn't leave much untouched. I wasn't supposed to." He leaned forward. We'll move ahead. You'll have final review authority. You'll name the external reviewers, and we'll announce it with you standing beside me." Amira's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't do optics." "This won't be optics," he said. "This will be a change people can feel. On the ground. In the air." For the first time, Amira believed he might mean it. She nodded once. "Then let's prepare for turbulence." The press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern in the Horizon Air headquarters in Atlanta. The podium was set before a navy blue backdrop stamped with two logos, one for Horizon and the other for Corvida Health. It was the first time Amira Langston allowed her name to be publicly tied to the airline since the incident. As she stood backstage, adjusting her collar, Maya gave her a final glance of reassurance. "You still good with this? I don't have to be comfortable to be clear," Amira replied. The moment she walked out, flashbulbs popped. The audience was mostly journalists, a few industry observers, and internal employees who had been invited to attend. It wasn't a spectacle, but it was intentional. Grant Meller stood at the podium first. He looked composed, humble even, as he began. "We are here today to acknowledge failure and, more importantly, to outline reform. Horizon Air is partnering with Dr. Amira Langston and Corvida Health to revise our customer equity policies, beginning immediately." A murmur passed through the crowd. He continued, "Our new charter, which we call the Horizon Dignity Protocol, will be based in part on the Langston Line. It includes mandatory anti-bias training, third-party review of any mid-flight seating changes, and public transparency on bias-related incident reports. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning." Then he stepped aside, and Amira took the microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. "I didn't ask to be here today." She began. "And if things had gone differently on a plane 6 weeks ago, I might not be—" Silence fell over the room. "I was asked to move seats under a false pretense, because of assumptions that were never questioned until I refused to play along. That refusal cost Horizon Air millions, but it also opened a door." She paused. "I walked through that door, not for spectacle, but for change. Today, we open that door a little wider." The applause was respectful, measured. A few journalists already had their tweets typed up. But outside the building, the story was fracturing. Online, hashtags began to trend. "Too far, too fast." "Langston Line backlash." "Keep politics off planes." A clip of Amira's speech, edited and stripped of context, was already circulating in certain echo chambers. "She wants to police pilots now." One post read, "This is what happens when DEI goes unchecked," said another. Within Horizon's own employee forums, internal conflict was bubbling. A leaked post from an anonymous first officer read, "Now we're being second-guessed by people who've never flown a day in their life. Safety is safety. This isn't social work." Another from a gate supervisor, "Am I going to get written up every time I enforce policy? This is a job, not a therapy session." Amira read the comments that night from her tablet in the hotel. She wasn't surprised. When systems resist, it's rarely the people at the top who push back first. It's the ones in the middle, those trained to follow rules without ever questioning where the rules come from. But what caught her off guard was the email she received at 1:42 a.m. from unknown null mail, org subject, "Stay in your lane." The message body was only one line. "You're not welcome in our skies." She stared at the words for a long moment, not because she was afraid, but because she recognized the desperation in them. When power starts to slip, fear dresses itself as rage. She showed it to Maya the next morning. You want to report it? Maya asked. No, Amira replied. I want to outlast it. But the next blow didn't come in the form of words. It came in the form of silence. 3 of Corvida's travel vendors suspended negotiations within the next 2 days. One cited recent political sensitivities. Another said they were reassessing their values alignment. The third didn't say anything at all. It wasn't just backlash. It was recoil. Corporate cowardice, dressed in neutral language. Amira stood in the middle of Corvida's war room with Maya and 3 senior VPs, whiteboards filled with talking points and contingency maps surrounding them. We need to decide now. One VP said, do we double down or pull back until this dies down? Amira looked at the board, at the dotted lines connecting press statements to vendor responses, at the arrows pointing toward share values and board sentiment. Then she turned away from the board and looked at her people. Let me ask you something, she said softly. Why do we exist? No one answered. Corvida was born because communities like mine were ignored in medical research, because protocols weren't written for black and brown bodies, because compliance didn't equal care. She took a step closer to the table. We didn't pull back then. We don't pull back now. Maya nodded, eyes unwavering. Then we go all the way. They updated their procurement terms the next morning. From now on, every vendor would be required to sign an equity rider stating explicitly that failure to meet the Langston Line protocols would terminate the contract. No exceptions. The media response was instant. Some praised the move. Others questioned if it was too aggressive. But Amira didn't waver. When asked by a journalist if she feared further boycotts, she replied simply, "You don't build a new standard by begging for permission." A few days later, something unexpected happened. Christine Hale, the flight attendant from Flight 815, published an op-ed in The Guardian. The headline read, "I was wrong, and I want to help make it right." In the piece, she detailed not just the moment she asked Amira to move, but the years of quiet compliance that led her to believe she was acting out of caution when, in fact, she was acting out of bias. She ended the piece with accountability isn't just about consequence, it's about reflection. I've spent weeks reflecting, and I'm still learning. But I see the line now, and I stand with it. The story went viral. Even some critics softened. And Amira, reading it quietly in her office, allowed herself the smallest smile. Change, she knew, didn't always come in waves. Sometimes it came one seat at a time. The envelope was cream-colored, thicker than the standard corporate stock, with gold-embossed lettering that read, "Invitation to Keynote Address Global Charter Aviation Conference Location, Washington, D.C. Date October 12th. Speaker, Dr. Amira Langston." Amira stared at it for a long time, the memory of the first time she'd been summoned to the Capitol still sharp in her mind. But this wasn't behind closed doors. This wasn't private briefings and polite hostility. This was a stage, a microphone, a spotlight, a message no one could filter. She accepted the invitation, not because it signaled a victory, but because it marked a beginning. When the day arrived, she boarded the chartered Horizon jet not as an outsider, but as a partner. The same airline, the same carrier, yet now with policies she had written, crew she had helped train, and a captain who greeted her by name and by choice. "Dr. Langston," he said, offering his hand. "You have seat 2A, the same seat." Her seat. Amira nodded with a calm grace. "Thank you." As she settled in, she glanced out the window, watching the runway blur into motion. Maya, seated across the aisle, leaned over and smiled. "How's it feel to sit in 2A with the whole world watching?" It feels earned, Amira said quietly, and overdue. The flight passed in comfortable silence. The crew treated every passenger with equal grace. And for once, Amira didn't have to brace for a moment. There was no waiting for the offense, no anticipation of the line that would be crossed. It was just a flight, which, she realized, was the most radical thing of all. At the conference, the ballroom was sleek, packed, and humming with energy. Executives, pilots, flight attendants, regulators, and vendors filled the rows, some curious, some resistant, some hopeful. When Amira was introduced, she walked to the podium in a deep navy suit. No accessories, no preamble. She placed her notes down and looked out at the room. 6 months ago, I was asked to move from this seat. She began, holding up a printed photo of her in 2A on Flight 815. I was told it was to balance the plane. What they didn't know was that I had already spent years balancing systems that were never built to include people like me. The room held its breath. What they didn't see was the work behind the seat, the credentials, the ownership, the choices. And what I chose in that moment was not just to stay in my seat, but to shift the weight of this entire industry. A ripple passed through the room. They told me to move. I said no. And then I moved. An entire protocol, a mindset, a company, and now, possibly, a culture. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. This is not about ego. It's not about punishment. It's about design, about choosing to rewrite defaults that should never have existed. She looked directly into the camera, knowing the speech was being live-streamed. To the CEOs watching this, your diversity reports mean nothing if your gate agents and crew act on bias. To the regulators in this room, policies are only as strong as the people enforcing them. And to those who think this is too much, too political, or too fast, imagine being told you don't belong in a seat you paid for. She stepped back slightly. I never wanted power. I wanted peace. But the moment I realized peace wasn't given, I built it, line by line, seat by seat. Thunderous applause erupted, not polite, not scripted, but rising, wave by wave. Amira stepped off stage to find Christine Hale standing near the wings. They hadn't spoken since the op-ed. Her face was taut with emotion. I just wanted to say thank you, Christine whispered. Not just for the policy, for not crushing me when you could have. Amira shook her head gently. I wasn't interested in crushing anyone. I was interested in making sure no one else had to stand in that position again. Christine nodded, tears welling. You did that? Back at the hotel that evening, Maya pulled out a bottle of Prosecco and 2 glasses. To the Langston Line. She toasted. To everyone who thought it was just a headline. Amira replied, clinking glasses. They sipped quietly, watching the city lights blink from the window. Before bed, Amira checked her inbox one last time. There was a new email. Subject invitation, FIA Policy Panel, Passenger Equity Standards. The message was short. We believe your voice should shape national policy. Let us know if you're ready. She smiled, not because it was easy, but because she was still standing, still speaking, still seated, and the seat. It had become more than a place on a plane. It had become a promise, one she would never give up again. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. She just stayed in her seat. And that quiet choice changed everything. Amira Langston didn't cancel a flight out of anger. She grounded an industry to remind the world that equity is not a courtesy. It's a right, one that cannot be rearranged, reassigned, or revoked, especially not at 35,000 feet. Through policy, persistence, and integrity, she transformed humiliation into history. She showed us that leadership isn't always loud sometimes. It looks like saying no when the world expects you to move. But this story isn't just about Amira. It's about every person who has been asked to give up their seat literally or figuratively because of how they look, where they come from, or what others assume they don't deserve. It's about us. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you angry, proud, emotional, or inspired, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep telling stories that matter, stories that uncover truth, stories that speak for those who have been silenced for too long. Because sometimes, staying in your seat is the most powerful move of all.